К сожалению, Гай не сможет присутствовать.
Unfortunately, Guy is not going to be at our panel discussion. We're going to discuss this issue without him. In a minute, we're going to have Tobias with us. He's given an interview. And Mark is going to join us as well.
All right. Может, на музычку какую-нибудь пока. Waiting for Tobias. He's coming back from the interview he's giving. Давайте еще раз поприветствуем.
So let's welcome our speakers. Let's give support. They shared very interesting presentations with us. If you have any question that you didn't have time to ask within their presentation time, you may ask right now and discuss this question right now. Aren't there any questions? I have a question to Catherine. I didn't have time to ask this question. I wanted to clarify. So from your perspective, in your opinion, is it important to present the project at the initial stage in such a way in order to prove its legitimacy by any additional documents, audits by consulting companies, your own opinion, calculations? How is that important from your perspective? You know, I do believe that it is very important to have research, to look into everything. You have raised a lot of money, you sell tokens to a great number of buyers. And I didn't have time to say this. It's not the regulator in place. You're going to have many suits if your project doesn't comply with a particular legislation. You don't want to have that. From my perspective, you need to have the consultancy, lawyers, economists, accountants are very important, but try to get advice with those who have done that already, who have carried out ICO. There are many guys who are ready to share the information, who have gone through ICO, who are ready to help you to say this should be done, this shouldn't be done. After the consultation with lawyers, that was the position. At the same time, I would recommend you to try to make your own research and to make your own conclusion. It is always great to have an official paper, but it doesn't work in courts. So you have a paper from PricewaterhouseCoopers where they have tax scheme, security scheme. Look, we have a paper, have paid a lot of money for this paper. The judge looks at that, okay, let it be so. The regulator says, okay, we cannot do anything about that. It is not going to be accepted as a proof in the courts where the regulator can say that, yeah, it is appropriate. Does it help to raise more funds? Of course, it helps, but you need to understand on your own, to understand the risk you undertake in order not to have further surprise in the future. But this paper from any company is not that important compared with your own homework and to get so-called backing of these big companies which are ready to say within your project that this project is legitimate and has a particular structure. Of course, it helps. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your answer. Our speakers are here, so let's start our panel discussion. I'd like to remind you, it is the cryptocurrency medium of exchange or an investment or transactions.
much, guys. You had wonderful presentations. It was very informative, very interesting. I think everybody enjoyed it. I'd like to thank the audience as well, because the strongest survived. It's very late today, and we are the latest panel. And it's very nice to see a lot of people in the audience. Thank you very much for supporting and staying and being interested in this topic. So we're mainly going to discuss two questions in this panel. That would be, the first one would be, what do you think are the benefits for the states to accept cryptocurrency as a payment, to officially accept it? What do you think are kind of like, what are the beneficial sides of it? And the second question would be, what are the risks? Kind of like pros and cons. So if we can discuss that, I don't think we need to do it in a specific order, but if we can address both sides of the coin, that would be wonderful. So who wants to start?
I think that, as I said like a few minutes ago, I think that it's important to have a national ledger and that plugs into a global ledger. And on the connection between them, there needs to be an on-off ramp that allows, and I think that crypto ruble, that this idea that was introduced in Russia is an idea in the right connection, in the right direction. Basically, if I can prove the source of the money, I can basically pay automatic tax. Like there's a very clear way, a protocol way to regulate this. So it's a digital regulation, not analog.
So I think it's more like it's a transparency, right? If you use a blockchain, if you use a currency on blockchain, that it gives the state a certain transparency of seeing where the currency is.
I think the government is most concerned by money laundering. That's the immediate problem. So you're solving that by finding a really clear way of declaring the money that's entering the national ledger, that exiting and entering the national ledger. On that point, you need to identify yourself. You need to be protocol compatible. And the regulator there, he builds the protocol.
Okay. So what everybody else thoughts on this topic? Sergey, do you want to say something about it? What do you think?
Sure. I mean, we think about the problem of state interference and and kind of getting involved with cryptocurrency from the standpoint of what we are trying to build for the consumers. And I think, you know, ultimately our task, and we're building a large digital economy for a specific segment of consumers that are hyper engaged, and there is a lot of commercial interaction among them where cryptocurrency really makes sense in terms of being the lifeblood for a closed economic system. And we think about this as kind of bringing the monetary system down to a pure interaction of supply and demand, where all externalities are removed. There are no intermediaries. There is no distortion in the system where what people want to buy and how they want to interact commercially defines the value of the currency, the use cases of it as means of payment, and ultimately, if there are network effects, then it's also an effective investment vehicle for them because the value of the currency grows. I think for the government, and it's difficult to think for them, but there are principal things that the government wants to do with such systems. I think AML is one. I think taxes is a clear number two, and I think the government has a tendency of wanting to control things, and how its role will ultimately play out in the system that we're trying to build is going to be the interplay of this natural intent to control everything that is related to money, and the fact that platforms like ours builds consumer value, builds extra disposable income that is taxable, creates additional value for the government that it have to forego to, if it were to prohibit the circulation of the currency. And I think ultimately the truth is somewhere in the middle between our intent and the government's, which is it will have to live with consumer-focused systems that are built from bottom up, but regulate them, tax them, and apply controls that allow to solve these critical problems, such as anti-money laundering.
That's interesting. Roel, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I totally disagree. Useless. No purpose. And I'm saying for one reason. In my presentation I said each cryptocurrency that needs to be successful needs to have a why and what for all stakeholders. Government-driven cryptocurrencies only have one major stakeholder, that's the government. And there's a clear value proposition for them. Not for the citizen, not for the businesses. So, I do see that there will be large community cryptocurrencies out there, but I think they need to, if the government really wants to issue a cryptocurrency that makes sense, they need to start to understand what the needs are of the population. They need to start to understand that, for example, companies want less bureaucracy, less cost of doing business with the government, and that citizens want better service, real-time accessible at lower cost. So only if those things happen, a cryptocurrency is going to make sense.
Yeah, but we think that governments implementing their own cryptocurrency and actually seeing it live successfully, the probability of that is pretty low in the first place.
Yes, that's true.
I think that governments are all investing a lot of resources right now to move from paper cash. There's a really strong incentive for governments to remove paper cash from the equation. Paper cash is the black economy. And if you want to build a digital alternative, you need to find a digital way to regulate this. I'm not saying that Bitcoin solves a business problem, that I don't need an intermediary to do a transaction. This is not a business problem that governments have. They have AML as their business problem. Their blockchain will be totally different. Maybe they're both called a cryptocurrency, but we need to understand how to do regulation for the digital economy, and this is something we need to help the regulator to do. They wouldn't accept Bitcoin as a means to pay taxes, and this will never happen. So they need to have a digital way accepting fiat.
Maybe just one thing. I think where I don't agree is I believe it will come rather fast that the governments introduce it because they have so much to gain there. And I also think it's really not what we want. When you look at where we come from, the idea of cryptocurrency and blockchain is a libertarian thought. Basically, we say, okay, take out the central government or whatever the central ruler and let the mass decide what is right, basically. And what we also have done is we have given governments a very potent instrument in their hands, and then I believe it happens very fast. Look at Japan. I mean, they are moving in this direction. I mean, as a Swiss guy, where we have, I think in Switzerland, the feeling that the state is only a service and not something to control citizens, and I think maybe in Japan that might be a bit of a different feeling. I see big risks. I really see that we walk into a brave new world environment where you have total transparency, but total transparency means total control over any money flows, and I wouldn't see why a government would wait with that. So I believe this might come fast.
So basically, if we think about it, then government as a controlling entity would have to be the one managing the entire currency, right? But in the same time, with blockchain, we have multiple participants, and we kind of we get to this transparency through the fact that there are multiple participants. That's kind of decentralized, right? Everyone can validate the same transaction. That you cannot really kind of do any fraud on that. Everything is visible and transparent. With the government being the main stakeholder in that, they can manipulate the system.
I think that decentralization is a spectrum, where Bitcoin is on, what we have today is on one side and Bitcoin is on the other. And there will be different flavors of blockchain. So it's not like a dichotomy, like this or that. Government needs a permissioned ledger, and the participants of that network will be the financial system of that specific country. Public ledgers, on the other hand, work on very different incentive modes and very different ecosystems and provide very different value propositions. They can coexist. We need to explain regulators how to connect the two.
Well, the main challenge is going back to what I just said. The government needs to do a lot more than just implement the cryptocurrency. They need to completely change the way they operate as a government. So we need flat, single-layered governments that orchestrate and don't control what's going on. So like the blockchain, the government needs to start setting boundaries and don't operate within those boundaries. They just said, like in a smart contract, saying this is the way we operate. And that is the real, let's say, a little bit further out sort of future where the government needs to start operating. And then a cryptocurrency is just a mean to make that successful. And it's not the other way around. When I speak to politicians, I get more the feeling that they implement a cryptocurrency to sort of take control of the process without really doing and implementing the changes that are required to create healthy, economical, social, vibrant societies, because that's what they're supposed to be doing.
What do you think about the risks that are associated with this? For instance, like the first thing that comes in mind is a simple security thing, was how to make sure that this system, this algorithm will not be hacked. If it's a cryptocurrency of the entire country, with the fiat, it's easy, right? You have one common organization controlling it, and then you can always issue more, right? If something gets stolen or whatever. Here on blockchain, the security question would be probably the main, or do you see other risks that are associated with the implementation, perhaps even in the best case scenario where we talk about, let's say, a smaller country with the government which is not multi-layered, right? So there still should be some sort of risks probably that are associated with implementation of cryptocurrency as a payment system.
I'm actually opposed to the notion that blockchain systems are somehow inherently less secure. I think that the fact that we're seeing, we had a talk earlier about smart contract security, and people talked about Bitcoin hacks and Ethereum hacks, and the only reason they're hacking them because they're worth a lot of money. The fact that the engine is wide open, everybody can see what's under the hood. Security best practices are implemented. Competitors share security best practices. After the Bitfinex hack, I saw how all the exchanges of Bitcoin in the world entered to one group, shared like what happened, how we can make it, how can we prevent it next time. And notice that nobody hacked on a scale like MTGOX since MTGOX, even though Bitcoin has a huge bounty to hack it. Again, Ethereum, parity, I'm sure that parity is going to be the most secure wallet in the world sometime in the future. We'll be serious about it. The hacks only improve the security. This is what the system needs to go through, and it doesn't happen in the banking system. In the banking system, we have one group of people sitting in a closed room, air-gapped its infrastructure, but that's not online security, that's offline security.
Yeah, the real question is also like, is the security breach that bad, or do we prefer to have another credit crunch? Yeah, so the transparency of the blockchain and the mechanisms that in which we can operate farly outweigh the risk of a hack. Far. I don't want to pay another like $10 trillion again to banks to bail them out.
I think the other thing we have to see is that fiat money by no means is not hackable. It happens all the time. It's just something banks don't really publish on page one because they don't want to lose all the trust. So I agree on that. I think we have here a good solution, and this solution will be tested in the future. I mean, that's when you look at a smart contract, it cannot be 99% correct. It needs to be 100%. Otherwise, you can be 100% sure that somebody identifies the 1%. And yes, there is some way to go. I think the problem will be as long as humans are involved in, you know, a marketplace or something like that, there will be mistakes. The blockchain itself, I think, is stable, but it will be quite a ride, and there will be probably some hacks coming along, and people will be shocked. But I don't think that it is worse than what we have today. It's just that we don't hear too much. If a bank loses $1 billion, they don't announce it.
Interesting point.
I think, you know, sorry to be persistent about the approach that is that is dear to me, but I think to discuss the probability and all the nuances of governments adopting cryptocurrency, I think it's much more chronologically correct and logically correct to just think about about how that might happen and what would the reasons be. Would they be reactive, or do they actually have use cases for their own cryptocurrency that will, as a fundamentally consumer product, in my deepest conviction, that is driven by a specific utility that a cryptocurrency have, a specific digital economy that is focused on something that that can be reliant on a single currency. The government effectively would be just replacing fiat currency with something that is technologically fashionable, but there is no greater idea behind it, and frankly, it is going to be. It's not going to be a true cryptocurrency, which I think in successful cases is by definition a global concept, not the one that is ultimately. It may start somewhere locally, like any fiat currency is by definition, but ultimately I think to succeed it has to serve a global use case. Therefore, the sheer probability of government inventing cryptocurrency because it has a use case, to lean against is quite low. I think what's more likely is the government is going to react to cryptocurrencies being created and become, a regulator and adopter of an active role in the economy that they serve.
Just to add something about what you said, like if we're looking at the Equifax hack a few months ago, where almost all the adult population of America, their social security numbers are now public. So American regulators look at social security numbers very much like Visa numbers and saying, how can we give user a private key? There's actually a discussion there, how we can give each user a private key. And maybe 10 years from now, we can actually go to our internal, get an ID from the government, which holds a private key, and then we're not doing a KYC. We're basically using the same identity with different banking players, like changing bank accounts, like changing your email accounts. I really think that this is something that a regulator can endorse and solves a pain for the regulator. And once you solve digital identity, digital money is shortly after. And once you have digital money, you have a ledger for real estate, then you have a solution for mortgages. And you have a ledger for healthcare, then you have a solution for healthcare insurance. There are digital bridges that could be created if we're using public protocols.
But you're talking about blockchain, really, not cryptocurrency.
I'm talking about blockchain. The token will be fiat.
All right. Thank you very much. Do we have some time to engage the audience in the discussion?
Да, у нас есть еще немножко минут.
Yes, we have a couple of minutes to ask the question. If you have questions, please raise your hands.
Идем вот отсюда.
We start from here. 3 years I've been studying the history of global currencies, additional currencies, extra currencies. And cryptocurrencies have emerged not a long time ago. They are quite popular right now. It is obvious that the cryptocurrencies are not the most convenient method of payment, as they do not correspond to the features which are applicable to regular fiat currencies. They are not that comfortable to use as the payment, and they are not so comfortable to store your money. I'm not talking about the industry solutions, like utility tokens particularly. I'm talking concerning the overall application of cryptocurrencies for payments and settlements. It is obvious that the cryptocurrency, when someone creates cryptocurrency, he doesn't create new money. So it's the same as you produce a program or a product, or other people buy these goods, so new money is not generated. It's the same about cryptocurrency. It does not create new money. What do you think about that? It's the first question. And the second question, it is obvious that there is the re-evaluation of cryptocurrency value. According to the statistics, in Bitcoin transactions, there are only 2% of money supply. It says about a big volatility of the currency rate. And if huge owners of cryptocurrency pools start to exit, it might be a very huge drop in the currency rate if it is done on purpose. For example, we know the fund it might not exit just at a particular period of time, but do it step by step. If it is done on purpose, the collapse may be very, very huge. I'm sure that if you deal with crypto trading, you are aware of many examples of using these for small cryptocurrencies. How do you think what is going on right now can be compared with the period of dot-coms, when the shares went up very fast, but then they collapsed because they didn't have any value? The same about cryptocurrency. If everyone starts selling bitcoins, we understand what is going to happen. How do you think it is a moment of overestimation for the cryptocurrency? If there is a case when this decline happens, like it was in dot-com case, how is it going to influence the idea of state cryptocurrency creations?
Question. let me please only answer to the second one, which understood better, and just my opinion there. Yes, I do see something which is not so unfamiliar from the dot-com bubble. But when you look at some companies which were starting way before dot-com bubble, let's take Amazon, yeah, they're still there, they make business, and they went up like everybody else, they went down again, but they still had some business behind. So my answer is an easy one. Yes, some cryptocurrencies we see today are unlikely to be here in 5 years from now. Maybe even in 2 years we will see about that. But some definitely will be, because they make sense, because the blockchain behind makes a lot of sense. And so the question is now, why do you run into cryptos? I mean, why do you buy a Bitcoin today? Most likely because you have the fear of missing out. Okay, everybody else made 1,000%, I didn't, so I better start buying. I believe this will go on for a while, but I agree with you that the values are currently high. They will become much higher, I believe. I don't think it's the end right now. And then there is most likely a crash in this one currency. But that doesn't mean that some other currencies will not have a more stable. Maybe we know that we call this Sippenhaft in German. It means that if you do something wrong, your whole family is wrong. So if Bitcoin goes down, it's very likely that Ethereum and IOTAs and so on also goes down. The same family. But it might be that they go up again much faster than others because there is some sense behind.
I think it's useful to talk about something specific. So, and I guess from what you've said that much of that discussion is about Bitcoin, right? Because we probably all understand that a lot of cryptocurrencies don't have compelling use cases. They don't have an underlying economy or a working protocol where valuable things get built, which contribute to the value of this one cryptocurrency. So with Bitcoin, I think my personal view is different from I think what you've expressed, because I think it serves a very specific purpose that is very consumer driven and is a global phenomenon, and it will become stable once everybody who's satisfy their own demand for that use case are in that cryptocurrency and they've invested as much as they can, which is, for the lack of a better comparison, a digital gold, the demand for which, think about what gold is right now, and I've dedicated several years to working in the mining industry and, and studying gold industry specifically. It's, as a financial asset, is something that is accessible to a low-digit % of the global population, of those people whose disposable income is sufficient to maintain the infrastructure of investing in gold. With Bitcoin, which will ultimately graduate from, its value being driven by FOMO to its value being driven by people using it as a means of value preservation. And the demand for that purpose of Bitcoin is only limited by the entire population of the earth that has access to internet and wants to have that instrument of value preservation, which at the moment it simply does not have. Therefore, there is intrinsic value that is the social contract among people who have chosen this to serve that purpose. You know, before they've chosen gold for, I would argue, you know, comparably arbitrary reasons as they would now choose Bitcoin, only the adoption of it is much faster and much wider because it doesn't have a logistical externality. You don't have to pay for the infrastructure of owning it.
Yeah, this is very interesting what you're saying. Somebody once told me why gold is, you know, as valuable as it is today. And the guy said, look, you couldn't make any guns or weapons from gold because it's too soft. You can't make any equipment to plow the land because it's useless. It doesn't do that. But there is one thing that gold has. It doesn't rust. And because it doesn't rust, it lasts a lifetime. And the challenge was digging up gold took a lot of effort. Mining, a lot of effort. And that's why it was seen as special and perceived to live on as valuable for a very long time. That's what they told me. Now you can make the analogy with Bitcoin. It's useless because the monetary design is crap. Yeah? It has no monetary value, let's be real. Yeah? It's just scarcity. That's, again, an analogy with gold. The third thing is, it's useless in daily life at this moment. So what you get is people see the value because actually it's not useful for anything else, and it's therefore sort of a collector's must-have item related to status. That's what drives the value.
I have a slightly different view. I think the only thing Bitcoin does right now, it's not cheaper, it's not faster, it's censorship resistant, and that's its value. The fact that you can buy tokens with it and bypass regulation entirely. And I think that a lot of Bitcoin maximalists that really don't like what's happening with Ethereum, I really believe that this year, the only reason we're seeing such a spike in Bitcoin price is the fact that you can buy tokens with it. If I have a crazy idea that raises $200 million, suddenly it's not that crazy. So right now there's a marketplace of ideas you can buy with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the base currency of this entire ecosystem, of the crypto ecosystem. The only reason I think it's so valuable. I do think in the long term it will be very valuable, but your question was about the dot-com bubble, and you can remember like the biggest company in the dot-com bubble was Yahoo, and really people were optimistic about its earnings. And most of those earnings spent on ads in Yahoo. There was no internet ecosystem. There was only Yahoo. So if somebody can draw a comparison to Ethereum, which is now very big, we don't see Yahoo anywhere around. Maybe we won't see Ethereum also. I believe Bitcoin will stay there. I don't know how much it costs, though.
Thank you very much. Did we answer your question?
We have one more question, okay? From this side. It was sooner.
Thank you for your valuable comments. Really appreciate it. We were talking now about the cryptocurrencies, and my question is, how do you feel should the cryptos be governed? It should be per country governance, or it must be a UN summit when everybody sit and everybody decided how to act, how to deal, how to govern all this new life? What are your thoughts? Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to create a voting mechanism in the blockchain, let the people vote and leave all the politicians out of it.
Well, my input on that from the legal standpoint, it's going to be very hard to have a united, all over the world, one clear understanding, because the law systems are very different in different countries, and some they're based on traditions, and some they're like case law, some are codified law. So to come up with something, first you would have to change a lot of national laws for every country to find these unified rules. So from the legal perspective, I see it very unlikely that this will happen. I don't necessarily see from the legal perspective huge benefit of it either, because it's very difficult to deal with. It's very difficult to come up to. So it might be a better start with like national regulations where you get to some level, and then maybe you can kind of like come up with the united mechanisms after everyone can share their experience somewhat, because then trying to come up with the united idea right away, it's going to be just a waste of time without because it's going to be лебедь, рак и щука. Все в разные стороны без какой-то...
When everyone goes in different directions without any common idea.
That is, it would be fantastic if it works. I mean, economical theory would love it. You have far less hurdles of international trade. You can allocate capital in the most efficient way at the most efficient place. And in a way, I see a certain small chance that exactly Bitcoin is paving the way for that, because Bitcoin is global. It's a global currency right now. And maybe Bitcoin really becomes a mean of exchanging goods, not only in darknet or something like that, but also for companies. And I know that some companies in countries where it's a bit more difficult, Iran, I was recently traveling there, Venezuela, we hear the same, really use that. Because they say, look, very stable, you don't lose money when you exchange it and so on. So maybe there is not a global currency accepted by all states, but maybe there is a global currency which is useful for the exchange of goods and services.
I just want to add that in order to regulate Bitcoin, you need to do two things. You need to close piracy, like a global coordinated attack against piracy. You basically need to shut down pieces of the internet, and you need to shut down all the tax havens in the world. Those are two coordinated global things that can really stop or do anything. Like regulating Bitcoin in Russia doesn't prevent from Russian to buy or join ICO, just makes it more complicated and more expensive. So I think Bitcoin is a pressure on governments even bigger than Facebook. So Facebook really affected governments. Some of them collapsed as a result. And I think Bitcoin will be much, much bigger influence, much, much bigger pressure, and that's important.
Mark, you said to stop Bitcoin or to regulate it, you need to shut down pieces of internet, but there is a project Blockstream. It uses satellites to connect to Bitcoin network, so even shutting down internet won't help. So it's like never stopping, right?
Yeah, but like Chinese people right now, they have like the Chinese firewall. Does it prevent from Chinese to use Facebook? Does it prevent them from using Google? They're still using it. So maybe they're not determined enough to shut down the internet, but if they wanted, there needs to be a coordinate. Like the VPN protocol needs to be under attack. There needs to be regulation against VPNs, against torrents, against everything else. Bitcoin is only riding on top of those technologies. It's not a new technology. It's like combining existing stuff.
Sure. We have one more question. We're having a closing ceremony in the main hall, so I don't want you guys miss it.
Thank you very much. Вопрос на русском.
I will ask in Russian, if I may. Yep. Do I understand it correctly that the world needs a kind of something to measure the value, or historically such values were different things, but the main thing were precious metals such as silver and gold? And do I understand it correctly that everything could be understood from a comparison? And as far as gold is more vulnerabilities compared to digital decentralized currency. In that case, I mean Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a flagship and the main capitalization belongs to Bitcoin. In fact, we do not know exactly how much gold we have in different storages in the world. We don't know how many paper notes are there secured by gold. These are two vulnerabilities which are not present in Bitcoin. Makes me think that Bitcoin probably, which personifies cryptocurrency, is a more convenient, more transparent, and more fair measure of the global values. And if my rationale is correct, and analyzing the fact that there are millions or just a couple of hundreds of owners of keep cryptocurrencies out of the population of 8 billion people, it should be kind of an exponential growth in the value of cryptocurrency, which I don't see. Well, can you comment on that? Can you comment on my deliberations? Let me comment on that in Russian, because I think that just everything you said, I totally agree with it. The biggest problem of gold compared to cryptocurrency is that as a tool to manage your wealth is not affordable or accessible by 90% of the world population. This is not about its utility or its features. So this is not that it cannot be compared to a cryptocurrency, just it doesn't meet the requirements of the bulk of the population in the world. And the rest of the population has more chances to get something they never owned as a cryptocurrency. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would like to thank everyone, all the participants in this panel discussion.
Your deep thoughts about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. Еще раз давайте
Once again.